Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
What would you do if you discovered that justice in the Wild West was nothing like what the movies showed? Forget heroic duels. The reality was made of ropes, furious mobs, and punishment so brutal they would make any modern court seem merciful. Today, I'm going to reveal to you the 11 worst documented punishments of the American frontier. Get ready. Everything is about to change from this point on. Punishment number 1, summary hanging. The fastest sentence in the Wild West. No court, no judge, no defense. On the American frontier, all it took was an accusation, true or not, for the rope to settle everything. The vast majority of victims never had a chance to prove their innocence. Justice lasted less than an hour. Death, just a few seconds. And when we say seconds, it's no exaggeration. Judge Isaac C. Parker, the hanging judge, sentenced 160 men to hanging in Indian Territory. Of those, 79 were actually executed. Parker was not a sadist. He was trying to impose order where the law barely existed. But the line between justice and cruelty in those times was as thin as the rope that hung from the gallows. And who carried out these sentences? Men like George Malladin, the Prince of Hangmen. For over 2 decades, he supervised at least 60 executions. His ropes were personally prepared, soaked, dried, and soaped to ensure what he called a humanitarian result. One of his favorite ropes was used in 11 hangings. He was proud of it. But hanging was not just punishment, it was spectacle. At the execution of the conspirators in Lincoln's assassination in 1865, thousands requested tickets to watch. Only soldiers and officials were granted access. Outside, crowds gathered and trains arrived packed with the curious. Death was the most attended event in the United States that day. And not every execution went as planned. When Blackjack Ketchum was hanged in 1901, the rope was measured incorrectly. The impact did not break his neck. It tore his head from his body. Executioners developed formulas to calculate the ideal length based on the condemned man's weight. But mistakes were frequent, and always fatal, one way or another. Public executions in the Wild West were social events. Entire families brought their children to watch. Vendors set up stalls around the scaffold. The death of a condemned man was Sunday entertainment, a reminder to the whole community. Follow the rules, or the rope will be your next companion. And everything had a literal cost. A record from 1849 from the Santa Fe court in New Mexico reveals that a single execution cost over $110, the equivalent of $4,500 today. Rope, lumber for the gallows, the executioner's pay, the prisoner's meals in his final days. Death had a price. In the Wild West, even killing was a business. But the rope did not always do its job. Bill Longley, one of the most feared outlaws in Texas, was captured by vigilantes and hanged as a horse thief. The rope snapped, and Longley survived the fall. His fate, however, was only postponed. In 1878, he was officially hanged by the state. The frontier did not forgive. It only delayed the inevitable. Records from 1875 in Arkansas describe the ideal gallows, a platform about 6.5 feet off the ground, a beam about 12 inches wide to support the ropes, and even a sloped roof in case it rained. Not out of consideration for the condemned, of course. It was to protect the spectators. In the Wild West, death needed to be comfortable for those watching from the outside. And when the execution failed, the result was terrifying. The condemned man slowly suffocated, thrashing for minutes while the crowd watched in silence or horror. Clinton Duffy, former warden of San Quentin, called these failures dirty hangings. The frontier could not always execute efficiently, but this was only the beginning of what was to come. Punishment number 2, mass lynching, when the mob decided who deserved to die. Unlike summary hanging, which at least pretended to have authority, lynching was pure mob violence. No trial, no defense, just an enraged mob that chose its victim. Approximately 4,742 people were lynched between 1882 and 1968. No one was ever punished. Montana holds the record for the bloodiest vigilante movement in American history. Between 1863 and 1865, hundreds of suspected horse thieves were hunted and killed in massive mob actions. Texas, California, and the Deep South were also constant hotspots. Where the state did not reach, the rope and the trigger took over, and innocence was a dispensable detail. In Tombstone, Arizona, 1884, John Heath was dragged from jail by a mob and lynched in the public square. suspected of involvement in a robbery that ended in death. There was no conclusive evidence. The mob did not need evidence. It needed a body hanging. And there was no age limit to the brutality. Francisco Cotto was only 15 years old. In Los Angeles, a mob identified him as a suspect in the murder of a woman. They dragged the young man down Alameda Street, stabbing him along the way. Before he could die from his wounds, they strung him up with a rope, all just a few blocks from the sheriff. No one intervened. The very word lynching carries a dark history. It probably derives from Charles Lynch, an 18th century Virginia justice of the peace who administered rough justice. The practice spread across the frontier as punishment for cattle thieves, horse thieves, and anyone who displeased the community. A rumor was enough. An unfounded suspicion was a sufficient sentence. The brutality provoked an international reaction. Foreign governments condemned the United States for the lynching of their citizens on American soil. Between 1887 and 1903, the State Department paid $480,000 in reparations to China, Italy, Great Britain, and Mexico. How can a country defend freedom without preventing mobs from killing innocents? On the rarest of occasions, there were consequences. In 1915, the Leon brothers were lynched in Pima County on suspicion of horse theft. Those responsible, deputies Robert Fenter and Frank Moore, were convicted of second-degree murder. Sentences ranged from 10 years to life. But in 1917, the governor pardoned them upon leaving office. Justice came and went with the same speed. Other lynchings were business disguised as justice. In the Johnson County War in the 1890s, large Wyoming ranchers hired mercenaries to lynch small settlers who were disputing land. Whoever had money bought the rope and chose the target. The Wild West was a system where economic power decided who lived and who died. But the real number of victims may never be known. Of the 4,142 documented cases between 1882 and 1968, individual murders, bodies never found, and names never recorded are left out. Every statistic hides hundreds of stories without a face and without a gravestone. The Wild West buried its secrets along with its victims. Most will never be unearthed. And the victims were not chosen at random. Mexicans, Chinese, Native Americans, ethnic minorities were disproportionate targets. Researchers estimate that 597 Mexicans were lynched between 1848 and 1928. For decades, these numbers were ignored by official American history. The frontier did not kill equally. It chose its victims carefully. Punishment number 3, scalping, the removal of a person's scalp, alive or dead. One of the most terrible practices of the frontier. It was practiced both in intertribal conflicts and by American colonizers, who paid official bounties for scalps as proof of an enemy's death. It was not barbarity from one side alone. It was shared inhumanity. Governments financed the practice. In Mexico and American territories, scalps were worth money. Men, women, and children, without distinction. James Kirker, an Irishman turned scalp hunter, led mercenaries who killed Apaches in exchange for bounties. His group collected hundreds of scalps in the 1830s and 1840s. Killing became a profession. The practice was so profitable that it generated fraud. Fake scalps, the scalps of Mexicans and mestizos, were sold as if they were from indigenous people. No one verified the origin. A scalp was a scalp. The money was the same. The frontier did not merely tolerate barbarity, it turned it into an industry. Where there is a bounty, there are those who will kill to collect it. Scalping was also psychological terror. It was not enough to kill. The proof had to be displayed as a trophy. Scalps were hung on posts, carried as ornaments, or presented to authorities as macabre documentation of mission accomplished. For the attacked communities, every displayed scalp was a message. No one is protected. No place is safe. American soldiers at the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864 took scalps and body parts as war trophies. Some were publicly displayed at a theater in Denver to the applause of the audience. What we now call a war crime was cause for celebration on the frontier. With the advance of colonization, scalping gradually diminished, but its marks remained on the following generations: collective trauma, destroyed territories, and a cultural scar that books took decades to acknowledge. Scalping was not just punishment. It was a chapter in the systematic dehumanization that defined the conquest of the West. The written records are scarce, not because the practice was rare, but because documenting it was risky. The few accounts that survive reveal a reality that contradicts the romantic myth of the Wild West. The frontier was not a land of simplified heroes. It was a territory where cruelty knew no limits and no sides. Punishment number 4, Bounty hunting, when your head had a price and anyone could collect it. Wanted, dead or alive. In the Wild West, those posters turned human beings into merchandise. All it took was a printed face and a dollar amount for dozens of bounty hunters to go after the target. It did not matter if he came back alive or dead, the payment was the same. And who were these hunters? Men like Tom Horn, who worked for the Pinkerton Agency before becoming a hired assassin, or Bass Reeves, the legendary black marshal who captured over 3,000 fugitives in his career. Some were former soldiers, others reformed criminals, many simply desperate men looking for easy money, even if it cost a life. Bounty values varied according to how dangerous the target was. Billy the Kid had his head valued at $500, equivalent to more than $15,000 today. Jesse James was worth $5,000, a fortune that attracted even his own friends. The greater the crime, the higher the price. The higher the price, the more hunters willing to kill without asking questions. The Pinkerton Agency was the largest criminal hunting organization of the era. Founded in 1850, it came to have more armed agents than the United States Army itself. They pursued Jesse James for over a decade. They hunted the Dalton brothers, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. Where the law did not reach, the Pinkertons did, and they charged dearly for it. But the line between hunter and murderer was thin. Many killed first and verified identity later. Bodies were dragged for miles to be photographed as proof. In some cases, innocent people were killed for resembling the target on the poster. A similar face, similar clothing, and a bullet settled the doubt. The mistake was only discovered too late. John Wesley Hardin was one of the most wanted. Accused of killing more than 40 men, he had a bounty of $4,000 on his capture. He was finally caught in 1877 by Texas Rangers in a train car. He spent 15 years in prison, studied law, and became a lawyer. But in 1895, he was shot in the back of the head in a saloon. The frontier did not forgive, not even those who tried to start over. And there were those who profited from anyone's death. In the Lincoln County War, armed men were paid per head, with no questions about who the victim was. Pat Garrett became famous for killing Billy the Kid, a shot in the dark that brought fame, but no official bounty. Garrett died years later, shot on a deserted road. The irony of the frontier spared no one. Wanted posters were distributed across the entire territory, printed in series, nailed to posts, train stations, saloons, and sheriff's offices. Some carried detailed descriptions, height, weight, scars, eye color. Others, just a poorly drawn sketch. But all carried the same message. This man is worth money. Find him, bring him in, dead or alive. Robert Ford became known as the coward who killed Jesse James. In 1882, lured by the $10,000 bounty, Ford shot the man he considered a friend in the back. He received the money, but also public contempt. He became a circus attraction, reenacting the murder. 10 years later, he was shot dead in a saloon. The bounty brought wealth, but it never brought peace. Bounty hunting was not justice, it was commerce. It turned lives into numbers and deaths into transactions. Any armed man could become an executor. Any fugitive could become a target. The system created heroes and villains, but mainly, it created a market where human life had a fixed price, and in the Wild West, that price was almost always paid in blood. Punishment number 5, vigilante executions, when armed citizens took on the role of judge and executioner at the same time. Where the state did not exist, vigilantes filled the vacuum with organized violence. And the most frightening part, many times, they were supported by the majority of the community. One of the first groups was the San Francisco Vigilantes, formed in 1851. They hanged criminals, were dissolved, and returned in 1856 when the city became corrupt. Hundreds of similar groups emerged across the American West. The idea was simple. When the law fails, we take over. The problem was that we could mean honest citizens or disguised murderers. In Montana, 1864, vigilantes hanged the sheriff of Bannock, Henry Plummer. Controlling the local press, they painted Plummer as the leader of an outlaw gang called the Innocents. But modern historians question whether the real criminals were not the vigilantes themselves. History was written by the winners. And in the Wild West, the winners held the rope. After the Civil War, the Reno Gang terrorized the Midwest, leading to the formation of the Southern Indiana Vigilance Committee. On the next attempted train robbery, vigilantes captured and lynched the leaders, Frank, William, and Simeon Reno. There was no court that could protect them. Frontier justice knew no appeal and no second chance. The problem with vigilantes was not just the violence, it was the corruption of power. Groups that started out legitimate became tyrants. Using masks and threats, they intimidated any opposition. In some cases, the vigilantes themselves were criminals using the facade of justice to eliminate rivals and steal land. The frontier did not distinguish heroes from villains. Punishment number 6, collective punishment. When an individual crime served as a pretext to destroy entire families or groups. In the Wild West, all it took was belonging to the wrong group or living in the wrong place. A single offense triggered reprisals that devastated communities. Collective punishment did not seek justice. It sought control through absolute fear. When a cattle theft was attributed to a Mexican community, the entire village suffered. Houses burned, residents expelled, men lynched with no distinction between the guilty and the innocent. The same logic struck Chinese camps and Native American settlements. The goal was never to find the real culprit. It was to send a message of terror to everyone. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, 1885, white miners attacked a Chinese community. At least 28 dead, 15 injured, and 79 homes destroyed. The motive? A labor dispute. None of the attackers were convicted. The federal government sent troops not to punish the murderers, but to restore order. Certain lives were worth less than stability. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864 in Colorado is one of the darkest episodes of the frontier. Colonel Chivington's troops attacked a Cheyenne and Arapaho camp under a flag of peace. More than 150 dead, the majority women, children, and the elderly. They called it a battle. Not all collective punishment was direct violence. The destruction of bison herds in the 1870s devastated native nations of the Great Plains. Hunters exterminated millions of animals that sustained entire communities. Without bison, they were left without food, without shelter, without tools. It was not just predatory hunting, it was deliberate subjugation through starvation. Families of the condemned also paid the price. When a man was hanged, his wife and children lost their provider and were socially branded, expelled from homes, prevented from working, persecuted by the same community that had killed their father or husband. The punishment did not end with death. It extended like a shadow over all who shared his blood. What set collective punishment apart was the intention behind it. It was not chaos, it was strategy. Destroy an entire group so that no other would dare to challenge the order. Fear was the true objective, and it worked. Communities submitted and fell silent because they knew that the next reprisal would not be for an individual, but for everyone around them. Punishment number 7, prolonged captivity. When prison was not rehabilitation, it was slow torture. The Yuma Territorial Prison in Arizona was one of the most feared places in the Wild West. Opened in 1876, it operated for 33 years and held over 3,000 prisoners in tiny cells, with temperatures exceeding 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The irony begins at the origin. The first 7 prisoners of Yuma were forced to build their own cells. Adobe walls over granite, surrounded by the Colorado River on one side and the desert on the other. Escape was nearly impossible. Anyone who tried was thrown into the dark cell, about 10 feet by 10 feet, no light, no air. Snakes and scorpions shared the space. The dark room was the destination for anyone who broke the rules. About 100 square feet of absolute darkness, stale bread and water as the only sustenance, chains on the ankles of anyone who had tried to escape. Guards stripped prisoners down to their underwear before throwing them inside. After sunset, every second in that total darkness felt like an eternity. And here comes the most disturbing paradox. Yuma had electricity, a hospital, a library with 2,000 books, and even a band formed by prisoners. Locals called it the Country Club of the Colorado. They said criminals lived better than free citizens. The outrage was constant, but the amenities never erased the daily brutality within the walls. 111 prisoners died in Yuma during its 33 years of operation, most victims of tuberculosis, a disease that spread through the overcrowded cells. Among the notable inmates were Pearl Hart, who robbed a stagecoach disguised as a man, and buckskin Frank Leslie, considered one of the fastest gunmen of his era. The prison did not distinguish fame from anonymity. Rare documents from inside Yuma reveal the real conditions: stone walls, iron bars, an impossible space for 6 bodies in one cell. Internal records of territorial prisons were extremely rare. The authorities had no interest in documenting what happened behind the walls. These accounts survive by chance and reveal more than any book. Yuma closed in 1909 due to overcrowding. The building became a school, then a shelter during the Great Depression. When the school team beat Phoenix, their opponents called them criminals as an insult. The students adopted the nickname with pride. To this day, the school is called Yuma Criminals. Punishment number 8, forced banishment, the death sentence disguised as mercy. Get out of town before dawn. In the Wild West, that phrase was the closest thing to a verdict. Being expelled into the desert or the mountains, without a horse, without a weapon, without water. It seemed like clemency. In practice, it was a slow execution where nature did the work, the rope did not. Vigilance committees in mining towns expelled anyone considered a threat. Justice included flogging, followed by banishment. But the real punishment came afterward. Many of the expelled were found dead days later, consumed by thirst, heat, or predators. Banishing someone in the Wild West was killing without getting your hands dirty. Accounts from travelers in Colorado describe settlements where men received warnings from vigilantes to leave town. Those who migrated to another village were not accepted either. The frontier was a place where not even the banished found refuge. Every town was a closed door, and every road led to the same destination, the desert and definitive silence. The warning arrived as a note on the door or nailed to a tree. Leave or die. No signature, no appeal, no deadline for any defense. Those who ignored the warning were found hanging from a tree or simply disappeared forever. Banishment was not clemency, it was a hanging with an extended deadline in nature as the silent executioner. Punishment number 9, deliberate abandonment, the silent execution of the frontier. Imagine being left in the middle of the desert, without a horse, without water, without a weapon, without direction. In the Wild West, it was a calculated way of killing without firing a shot. The scorching sun of Arizona turned anybody into a corpse in hours, the perfect punishment. No one got their hands dirty. Taking someone's horse was enough. The distances between towns reached hundreds of miles of arid terrain. Without a mount, a man on foot faced dehydration, heat stroke, snakes, and predators all at once. When the body was found, they called it an accident. But everyone knew the desert did not kill alone. Someone turned it into an accomplice. In the mountains, abandonment was equally deadly. Temperatures below zero, sudden blizzards, and the total absence of shelter turned any abandoned person into a corpse before dawn. Entire communities participated, not as direct executioners, but as silent accomplices who turned their backs while someone was led out of town. What made abandonment effective was precisely its invisibility. And there was no body hanging in the square. There was no official record. The victim simply disappeared, swallowed by the desert, by the mountains, or by the silence of a community that decided that person did not deserve to exist. The frontier erased people the way one erases footprints in the sand. There are accounts of prisoners deliberately released into areas infested with rattlesnakes, dead-end canyons, or plains without any water source for full days of walking. Freedom was a calculated trap. The release was the verdict, and the landscape was the executioner. No judge needed to sign the sentence. Nature took care of everything. Punishment number 10, forced labor. When prison was not enough and suffering needed to be useful. On the American frontier, criminals were not merely locked up. They were chained to one another and forced to break rocks, build roads, and work in mines under the scorching sun. They called it a chain gang. The sentence was not losing your freedom, it was losing your dignity. The convict leasing system allowed private companies to rent prisoners from the government for pennies a day. Mining companies, railroads, and farmers paid next to nothing for labor that could not complain, flee, or quit. It was slavery disguised as legal punishment. Many died of exhaustion before completing their sentence. Profit was worth more than human life. The chains weighed between 11 and 33 pounds. Fastened to the ankles, they connected groups of 10 to 20 men who had to walk, work, and sleep together. Trying to escape meant dragging the others or being dragged. The sound of chains hitting the ground became the symbol of an era. Whoever heard it knew. Here came men that society had decided to turn into tools. They broke rocks from dawn to dusk. They built the roads that would connect the country. They dug mines where free men refused to enter. Without enough water, without adequate food, without rest, the guards carried whips and shotguns. Any resistance was punished with more work, less food, or simply a gunshot. After all, there were always more prisoners arriving. In Huntsville, one of the most brutal prisons in the South, prisoners worked on cotton and sugarcane plantations, fields that looked identical to those that existed before abolition. Only now the workers wore striped uniforms instead of chains. The difference was merely cosmetic. The system had found a legal way to keep slavery running. Chain wounds were so common they earned their own name: shackle sores. The skin would tear, become infected, turn gangrenous. Doctors were rarely called. If a prisoner could no longer work, he was discarded, replaced, forgotten. The system did not need healthy men. It needed arms. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but left a fatal loophole. Except as punishment for crime, all it took was arresting someone for vagrancy, drunkenness, or any fabricated charge, from a free man to a forced laborer in a matter of hours. Thousands were imprisoned for crimes that no longer even exist today. The law protected the system, not the victims. Freedom had fine print. Forced labor was only officially abolished in the mid-20th century, but its legacy remains. The roads built by chained men still exist. The buildings erected with the sweat and blood of prisoners still stand. And the question that no one asked at the time echoes to this day. Was this justice, or simply slavery by another name? Punishment number 11, public display of corpses, when death was not enough and the humiliation needed to continue. On the frontier, killing an outlaw was just the beginning. The body was photographed, displayed in open coffins, and the images sold as souvenirs. The punishment did not end with the last breath. It continued until the last penny was collected from the curious. When famous bandits were killed, their bodies became attractions. Placed on ice to slow decomposition, they were displayed to the public for days. Thousands lined up to see the corpses. Photographers set up makeshift studios and sold portraits as souvenirs. In death, criminals generated more profit than they ever managed to steal in life. The spectacle had no end. In 1892, a gang made the fatal mistake of trying to rob 2 banks at the same time in a small town. The residents responded with gunfire from every direction. When the smoke cleared, 4 members were dead. The bodies were propped upright, rifles placed in their hands, and photographed like hunting trophies. The images sold thousands of copies across the country. Leaders of feared gangs received special treatment after death. Bodies were taken to the nearest town, photographed in a studio, and displayed in funeral homes. The images became postcards, sold for pennies. Children posed beside the open coffins. The death of a criminal had been transformed into a tourist attraction and a family business opportunity. But no case is more bizarre than that of a bandit with no fame, killed in 1911 after stealing a mere $46 from a train. His body was embalmed with arsenic, and when no one came to claim it, the funeral director began charging 5 cents from the curious to see it. Thus began a macabre journey that would last more than 60 years through carnivals and amusement parks. The mummified body was sold to a traveling carnival. It traveled across the United States under nicknames like the Bandit Who Would Never Be Captured Alive. It passed through wax museums, horror shows, and haunted houses. Over time, everyone forgot that it was a real body. It became just another attraction, an object without a story, without a name, without dignity. No one asked who he had been. In 1976, a television crew was filming at an amusement park in California. While moving what they thought was a wax figure in a house of horrors, the arm broke off, revealing real human bones. It was the Bandit from 1911. 65 years after his death, he was finally identified. His body had been displayed, sold, and forgotten for longer than he had lived. The Bandit was finally buried in 1977 alongside other outlaws of the Wild West. To ensure that no one would ever disturb his rest again, they poured concrete over the coffin. About 300 people attended the funeral of a man no one had known in life. After 66 years as a curiosity, he found peace. His death earned more than his crime ever would have. The display of corpses was not the exception, it was the rule. Bodies of bandits killed in famous shootouts were photographed in their coffins. Hanged murderers were left dangling for hours as a public warning. The message was clear. On the frontier, death did not guarantee rest. If you lived outside the law, your body would continue paying the price even after your last breath.